Welcome everybody to the I3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography program at the School of Visual Arts. We're thrilled to have photographer, writer, filmmaker, and educator Corinne May Botz as tonight's guest speaker. Corinne earned her BFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art and her MFA from Bard College. She is currently based in Brooklyn, and her work is represented by Ben Ruby Gallery. She is best known for being a chronicler of everyday spaces with secret, invisible histories. Her published books combining photography and writing include The Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death by Monacelli Press, 2004, and Haunted Houses, also by Monacelli Press, 2010. Exhibitions include Museum of Contemporary Photography, Chicago, De Appel, Amsterdam, Turner Contemporary, Margate, UK, Bellwether Gallery, New York City, and Hemphill Fine Arts, Washington, D.C. Reviews of her work have appeared in the New York Times, The New Yorker, Art Papers, Foam Magazine, Book Forum, Modern Painters, and Time Lightbox. Corinne is on the faculty of the International Center of Photography and John Jay College of Criminal Justice, CUNY. Please help me welcome Corinne May Botz to our lecture series.
Hi, thank you so much for coming out tonight and for having me. So my deep interest in photography began really in high school, and I grew up in northern New Jersey, started coming into the city to go to exhibitions at museums and galleries, and started collecting photography books. My neighbor had darkroom equipment she wasn't using, so I set up a darkroom in their basement so I could print independently. And one of the things that has remained consistent in terms of my interest in photography is, one, how it's a means of connecting with people. I form sort of close relationships or attachments with people I meet through my projects, as well as historical figures, and I often use the camera as a license to access places that I wouldn't be able to go to otherwise, oftentimes engaging with other disciplines or institutions. So I think it's a privilege to be able to do that through the perspective of an artist, and to have those crossovers between art and medicine or science take place. And I also am interested in the very basic way in which photography makes things visible. And oftentimes I'm interested in things that we really don't want to look at, or we don't want to consider, things that are difficult to look at in some cases, and either marginalized or invisible in society in some form or another. And I sort of show a little bit more work than I normally show, but I also don't want to rush through things. This is a project that was incredibly formative to my development as an artist, The Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death. And I began this when I was an undergraduate at the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore. I, first of all, photographed my family through the window of the dollhouse that I played in when I was little. And so using that as a viewing device to exist between like an adult and child world. And then I started making a video about women who collect dollhouses. And through that video, I met a prosecutor who was also a dollhouse collector. And she had hundreds of dollhouses, but no dolls in them, because she wanted to create a perfect world, because in her profession, she saw murder and child abuse and rape every day. And so I said, oh, it's interesting. I also have this interest in crime scene photography. And she said, you have to go to the medical examiner's office. There's this collection of crime scene models that were made in the 1940s and 50s after actual suicides, homicides, and accidental deaths. So I went to see them, and these three interests of mine that I already had when I was in college in forensics and gendered space and dollhouses came together in this way that I could never have anticipated. And I was just completely blown away and sort of mesmerized by these models. And I didn't realize that I would spend 7 years working on the project. So I immediately started photographing them with a large format 4x5 camera. And so a little background. So they were made by this woman, Frances Glessner Lee, and she made them to train police officers on the first Department of Legal Medicine at Harvard that she established. And at that time, State troopers were often the first to arrive at a crime scene, and they didn't properly identify or assess visual evidence, and so these cases were botched. They're still used for training purposes today. And as you can see, there's an astounding level of detail and precision. Pencils write, whistles blow, a little tiny lock will actually work, lock a door, stereoscopes work. And in this case, you can see that there's a cabin which was burned in a precise way to show where a fire started. Each one is also frozen in time, and for me, in a kind of photographic manner with the calendars in almost every single case. So I immediately thought how incredible they would be to reanimate photographically. They're so still as objects. And I also connected with them on this very personal level. I was living in Baltimore at the time in this dangerous neighborhood, and there was a number of sexual assaults that had taken place, and I grew up in a safe neighborhood in New Jersey, and so I was aware of sort of vulnerability, both walking around the streets and in my apartment, and identified with the miniatures in terms of thinking about the victim's perspective or a loved one who would come across the scene of the crime, so a bit different than the original perspective of an investigator analyzing and looking at it visually in a more systematic manner. And so I didn't want to sort of replicate this sense of a cold scientific viewpoint. I wanted to bring a sense of intimacy or grace to the scene of the crime. And I was thinking about playing in the dollhouse when I was a child, and when you would lose your sense of proportion and sort of experience the large and the small. And from the start, you can't move anything around. They're kind of theatrical in how they're built. But I was interested in bringing more of a cinematic gaze and not taking overall encompassing viewpoints. With a 4x5 camera, you can see like exactly what's in focus in terms of that sliver of focus. And I also started making large-scale darkroom prints from the start as well to create more of a disorienting viewing experience for viewers where you relate in a more physical manner, and they also sometimes look lifelike when they're enlarged. So with this picture, I was sort of has a more oblique relationship to violence, some of the details. And even like my own interest in crime scene photography, I'm interested in the banality of the scenes as well. You get a sense of how people live during certain time periods through these crime scene photographs. And of course, the objects feel changed through their association with the crime. In these slippers, they were knit with needles the size of straight pins using a magnifying glass, and Frances Glessner Lee could only, would work for a minute or two before her eyes would fatigue. So there's also this sense of like loving care lavished upon these miniatures that I wanted to highlight and bring to life. From the start, I noticed this very gendered component in the models where 12 out of the 18 victims were women. So I was wondering, and I didn't find any evidence of this, but if she had a specific interest in those type of cases. The men were shown in more stereotypically masculine parts of the house, like a barn and a public space, in a jail, in a garage, and the women were killed in more of the bedrooms and the kitchen, the images that you've seen. And I personally think of them as this precursor to the women's movement in the sense of her showing how oftentimes violence originates and is enacted within the home, and that the home can be safe as well as terrifying. And as with real life cases today, most people were murdered by people that they were intimate with, spouses. So here she is, Frances Glessner Lee. She lived from 1878 to 1963. And I was interested in the models from a lot of different angles. I think forensics is fascinating, but from the start, it was really her and her life story, and I sensed so much of her in the models, and I had so many unanswered questions. So when I graduated from school, I began the second component of the project, which was researching. I interviewed all of her family members that I could connect with, her daughter-in-law, who was in her 90s, that I interviewed before she passed away. I tracked down her carpenter through some amazing luck, and I stayed for the weekend with an old police officer who had worked with her really closely. So I felt kind of like a detective myself, and she was I felt so lucky that she was such an amazing and incredibly fascinating woman. And so for me, part of the aim was, from the start, was publishing a book, making people aware of her work, because I thought of her as this unsung, well, she was an unsung pioneer of forensic medicine. And luckily people are more aware of her work now and things are changing, which is great. So anyhow, she established the Harvard Department of Legal Medicine, and she would preside over these training seminars. You can see what a male-dominated group it is. The only other woman in the picture is her daughter, Martha. And I could do like an hour talk on just her, so I have to stop myself. But some important details: she was born into a wealthy family. The Glesner house, the house that she grew up in, is a historic house museum in Chicago, very much worth a visit. It was built by Henry Hobson Richardson, and her parents believed in the arts and craft movement. Every single aspect of the interiors were thoroughly designed. Very similar in approach to the nutshell studies, where these rooms they thought of as these cultured, moral environments to raise their children in. And just like the nutshell studies, the furniture was handcrafted, one of a kind. So it was interesting how she sort of continues, but also perverts like her parents' obsession with their home. Her father wrote a book about their house. And she was homeschooled. She would have loved the opportunity to study medicine, but that was not possible. So it wasn't until late in life she followed a very prescribed role for an upper-class woman. She got married, she had 3 children, and it wasn't until she got divorced and came into her inheritance that she was able to sort of follow this lifelong passion for forensic medicine. And so it's the story of a late bloomer. Also, she advances in this very male-dominated field by co-opting this feminine tradition of dollhouse miniatures. And so when I went to New Hampshire to the Rocks Estate, which was her country house and where she, as a child, and she lived there full time as an adult, I was like going down the road and I recognized her cottage because it was miniaturized in one of the paintings. So she put her own house in this model. And so even though the cases that she focused on were the cases she came across more lower class interiors, very different than the houses she lived in, she also did include a lot of personal elements. They're all composites, so everything happened, but not exactly as you see it. So she took artistic license in designing them, and she was a fan of Sherlock Holmes books. So for me, I always love this kind of overlap between fact, document, and imagination and fiction. Even like with the names of the different figures, to how the interiors are decorated. Absolutely, but you can't. So one of the things, her aims was to strengthen the relationship between the officer on the scene of the crime and the prosecutor and the medical examiner, and to change the coroner system to a trained medical examiner system. And so you can't solve these by just looking alone. You would need to have an autopsy and toxicology results. So basically, there's a text, there's witness statements, nothing is as it meets the eye. But in the end, you might have a hypothesis and there are solutions, but you can't completely determine it without. But yeah, there's definitely lots of clues. In this case, you have like very clearly delineated masculine and feminine bedding, and that one connects to the crib that we saw earlier. The attic. So from the start, a lot of times artists will have, a exhibition, and they'll do a catalog, and maybe eventually they'll do a book. But for me, I got the book deal, and I was like, oh, I want to have an exhibition of the work as well. But it was always, the goal was to publish this book. The book form makes a lot of sense for many of my projects because it's very democratic. I can reach a much larger audience. And then since there's so much inquiry and writing that underlies my process, it's a way for me to contain all of this other information. So there's like a different book versus exhibition version. This was at Bellwether Gallery. Those are all darkroom prints that I made, all 30 by 40 and 40 by 50. And then there's some smaller vignettes in the hallway space. And so For the exhibition, they're more of the iconic pictures. It's more about making narrative connections between the models, the focus on gender, and in the book, they're organized case by case. And yeah, I definitely grew up with this project in so many ways, and I think you'll see the influence when I show you some of the other works that I did. And it was also a very gratifying experience to put this book out into the world, and to see, even like years later, someone picks it up and they learn about her, and then there's an exhibition at the Renwick Museum. So it's been exciting to see her recognized more for her work. So next is Haunted Houses, another long-term project. Worked on this project for 10 years. It overlaps with other projects that I did. I photographed in over 100 haunted houses around the country. So houses that have ghost stories connected to them. And I was very much interested in domestic ghost stories, so spaces that were currently or were at one point actual domestic houses where people lived. And I was never trying to prove or disprove ghosts. I think ghosts exist because people tell ghost stories. And for me, what interested me from the start was this idea of, the ghost being attached to a house, this idea of such a strong emotional or some sort of connection to the house that they're still thought to be there. There's part of the fabric of the house, a favorite motif in film and literature, though, because they're also interlopers and they undermined the boundaries of this safe, secure home. And a lot of people that I met think about the ghost as being someone who loved the house so much, or they built it, or they did so much work on it, or they died there, and that's why they're still thought to be in that space. And it's also like this wonderful way to think about, for me, I don't think about houses as being inert objects. I think of them as sort of collecting memories, traces, positive, negative experiences or emotions. That was taken in Harlan, Kentucky. One thing I was interested in was how that corner of the room feels really flattened with the wallpaper and just the bedboard and the mark making and everything. So I never know where a project will take me, and one of the reasons why I love the luxury of working on a project for so long is that I change, the project changes as I change, and there's sort of this give and take. I think when I started the project, when I just graduated from school, I was more interested in the paranormal, and when I was ending the project, I was more interested in this history of domestic space. So there's a bit of both of that in there. This is a project I took in a house that dates back to the Revolutionary War in New Jersey, and just looking at it. So when I photograph, I have my large format camera, and I kind of just still the architecture that I'm looking at. And here I was interested in what is that line demarcating, this idea of a cusp between worlds, like life and afterlife, the dark room giving way to the bright white room with the window, and the symbolism in terms of even Gothic tales of escape and entrapment within the home, and is escape possible? So there's a lot of symbolism in that way. This is a picture I took in Staten Island at a restaurant that was a home at one point, and the woman who said to haunt the house committed suicide after her husband died in the Civil War. And this is a photograph I took of a fragment of the painting, and I think it's an important image. It ties into this Victorian sensibility. I was definitely influenced by mediums during the Victorian time period who were said to be connecting to spirits in the afterlife. And I thought of myself as continuing that tradition of feminine sensitivity. And I tried to sort of open myself up to these invisible nuances of the space when I would go into photograph. In this picture, in addition to that element, you can literally see the layers in space, because this ghost supposedly burnt her own painting because she was angry. So you can see the wallpaper and the sort of burn mark behind it. This is in Wyoming. So I photographed with a 4x5 camera, and I don't think I could have done this project if I was shooting digitally. I would have had way too many pictures. You go into a space, you don't really know what to photograph, so the tendency with digital might be to take a lot of pictures. And instead, I had this big, expensive, cumbersome camera, and I would just take, well, it depended on how much time I had there, but sometimes just 3 pictures. I might spend an hour or two and take 3 images. And so the pictures were almost like souvenirs that I took away with me, little remnants of that experience. And the camera that you're shooting with really shapes the project. So that camera helped to ground me in the space. It's a lot of information to take in, this new environment, a new person that I'm meeting. And so having a fixed lens on a tripod with a camera and just making use of available light was really important because it helped me listen to the space, sort of experience the space. This is a long exposure. I also like the idea of just like leaving the camera for like 15 minutes or half an hour and then coming back, and the surprise of not knowing exactly what was captured on film. And a lot of the pictures were taken very dark lighting situations. So I don't think I said this, but I should say I would just show up at someone's house with my camera and knock on the door. They would say, I heard you have a ghost in your house, or there's a ghost story, can I come in and take a picture? It was very rare that I set anything up beforehand. Sometimes I would travel. I wanted to go to Harlan, Kentucky, because of the labor movement there and that history. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll just try to find a ghost story while I'm there by myself. And actually, it was very hard to find there, but I did find one. Usually walking around, talking to people, going to historical societies, libraries, going to a diner or a shop. There's a lot of haunted houses, so it's a very fun way to travel. There's 3 cats in that picture. I'm allergic to cats, but you'll see there's lots of cats in my photos. That's the one from Harlan, Kentucky, and no one outside the family ever lived in that house, so there's this interesting continuation of negotiating space with the grandma who was said to haunt the house and didn't get along with the woman's husband that I met. And the little girl came home, so I recorded the ghost stories when I was there, people's ghost stories. The little girl came home from school, she was about 7, and I have her telling the story of this car that has no batteries, this Barbie car driving around by itself, and her seeing her grandmother at night. Apparently it drove out the door and went down the street. So just like the images, the stories were kind of like fleeting. There's something that felt like impermanent about them, and just sort of capturing them, and this sort of simplicity of listening to someone's story. People really love to tell their ghost stories. It was, and I got invited to stay at people's houses and have dinner with them, and I stayed over at someone's house in Harlan, Kentucky for the night instead of my hotel one night. So people really opened their houses up to me. This is in Maine, down the street from my aunt, and this was posted on the Paris Review Daily, and a lot of people wrote in about this house because apparently a lot of people pass it going through this route, and people wrote to me, should they buy it? They heard there's ghosts in it, do you think they should buy it? I didn't write back. But people talked about becoming comforted by their ghosts, so after an initial scary experience, a lot of people that I met make a place for the ghosts inside their house and become attached to their ghosts. They wish the ghosts a Merry Christmas, they ask it to protect the house. So the history of spirit photography was inspiring for this project, but first and foremost, it was reading ghost stories written by female authors. Toni Morrison's beloved, Willa Cather, a lot of different, Edith Wharton, a lot of different writers. So I also tried to photograph in literary places that were also haunted, like the Edgar Allan Poe house in Baltimore. This is the entrance to his bedroom. And I photographed at the Mount. This is an army barrack. I was interested in, again, like this tape, what is that designating? It feels like some sort of evidence. Also, right where the stair turns, this turning point, it looks like a bit like a coffin. So I think this project really made me a much better photographer. When I first started taking the pictures, my work has an interesting relationship to the documentary tradition because I'm interested in going out into the world, having experiences, sort of letting the world confront me and bite back, so to speak. But at the same time, I'm not interested in taking any sort of objective photograph. And with this project, I was still kind of grappling with my relationship to documentary. So it took me a while to become confident in terms of taking the picture I wanted to take. And maybe it seems strange in some way that I might drive 5 hours and take a picture of a step. But once I followed my intuition and took the pictures I wanted to and let my own subjectivity become more part of the work, the pictures became so much more interesting. So I always say there's like 3 subjectivities at play. There's the very subjective ghost stories that are transcribed. I made a vinyl record for exhibitions, so that if you're at an exhibition, you can decide to play the vinyl record and hear these ghost stories, and it becomes a more communal listening experience. And then there's the photographs that are very subjective, and then there's the viewer. And again, this idea of projection, like if there was a different framework that you looked at all these pictures, would you think of them in a completely different way? So this idea of suspending disbelief and how much are you experiencing something, how much are you projecting, that all was like very interesting to me. So pretend that's a different person's piece, FYI, that boom box there. But so these are the pictures installed. As you can see, this idea of seriality and collection comes into play. I like the idea of people comparing and contrasting, sort of imagining this quintessential haunted house by seeing them all in relationship to one another. And part of it was also this idea of a collection. So there's a whole tradition of people going cross country to photograph. It's almost a rite of passage for photographers. Alex Soth, Robert Frank. Oftentimes they're looking more at exterior public spaces and events. And so I thought of myself as this flaneuse of the female version of the flaneur, collecting interior views and of homes. And so there's, I think in any project that you do, there are different motivations conceptually and psychologically. And so one of like the more personal parts for me with the project of taking a lot of pictures was getting a sense of how people live pretty much throughout my 20s, if I think about the time period, and thinking about my own home that I grew up in was like a very safe starting point to make this work, but there's also a larger cultural history of women being disenfranchised by the home and isolation within the home and this invisible labor within the home. So I was kind of coming to terms with that cultural history and kind of reclaiming the space, so to speak. That was one other element of the work that is important. And there's also this idea of capturing the invisible with photography. And photography is all about the surface and the visible. So it's almost this conundrum where I wanted to build up a lot of evidence with what photography does so well, which is capturing the visible. And by looking at a lot of pictures, maybe you become more aware of this sense of absence. So again, I thought of this project as a book from the start, being this democratic form, allowing me to layer the ghost stories, along with a personal essay that I wrote about my experience taking the pictures, and women, and houses, and ghosts. I worked on the next project that I'll show you about agoraphobia at the same time, so there's this kind of this overlap between all the projects. And I had an elderly monk from the Pacific Northwest who saw this book and was writing to me for a while. So there's just like this amazing, I should have gone to meet him, but it wasn't possible at the time. But there's an amazing way where a book goes out into the world and you don't know who's going to see it and what's going to happen. So it's just a much larger audience than an art on the walls of an art museum or gallery. And I had the same designer, Michael Worthington, who's an incredible designer based out of LA, designed both books, so they work really well together. So this is a project parameters. And the starting off point for this project was agoraphobia. And I think I first learned about agoraphobia through reading books about architectural theory and space. And I was interested in the gendered component. It literally means fear of agora or the marketplace. And 80 to 85% of sufferers are women, connecting it to gender inequalities. It's dubbed the housewife disease. And so I decided to photograph the interiors and these safe spaces of people with agoraphobia. One of the things that interested me was that they described their home as both a prison and a haven. So there's a sense of security of being able to control space within the home. At the same time, that brings a sense of like confinement and can be very stifling. So when I was looking at them, I was looking at the sort of layers within the space. Sometimes coziness seems synonymous or safety with the overaccumulation of objects. in that case, some of the people that I worked with were homebound and didn't leave their house. And while in terms of like the literature, it's thought of as more of a middle upper class disorder, most of the people that I met were more like middle or lower class, and they had to think about how they would financially survive without leaving the home. And in this case, I was interested in the way that this threshold between these rooms became visible and was highlighted. You can see the baskets and the ribbons, a sense of like collecting and hoarding in this particular picture. I also observed a lot of imagery of like nature and pets, either through objects in the house or through actually having animals that offered a sense of companionship. And this picture, I put this project in, I haven't shown this project in a while just because I have so many projects, it becomes a little too much, but I put it in, I hadn't looked at this picture. It's interesting. I'm doing a project now about lactation, so it was interesting to revisit this one. I've always thought of this picture as just this feeling of complete like togetherness and the desire to go back to that. And in this picture, I was interested in this idea of time and this idea of worlds within worlds, and also this Victorian sensibility. So when I took pictures, again, it's the large format camera, and I did sometimes bring in strobe lighting to sort of highlight the sculptural element of the objects. In this case, this picture was available natural lighting. This was Bruce, my only male volunteer, and these are his safety objects. And just like the models, I didn't move anything around when I was taking the pictures. With the calendar, you can see the X's become a bit more pronounced as the month goes on. One of them says that I'm coming to photograph, and another one says more space with a question mark, which I thought was interesting. So these are portraits of people through spaces, and I was interested in these overall compositions and this idea of creating a portrait of a person through space, these psychological interiors, and that was something that, again, I learned about through the crime scene models, where something that always interests me in like literature or crime fiction, the way that a character could be developed or a story can be told through the description of interior space and the objects in a room. So again, it's kind of this impossibility. You can't photograph agoraphobia, you can't photograph an illness or a condition, but this was my way of kind of pointing to signs and symptoms and referencing that. And I'll say I became very close to the people that I met, and I'm still in touch with some of them today. And I would say it was my most difficult, challenging project in many ways in terms of boundaries between photographer and subject, and sort of navigating all of that. It was very challenging. Yeah, so I mostly found, obviously it was haunted houses, very easy to find. People with agoraphobia who want to have you come take a picture is not so easy. So most of my volunteers I found through the internet, and even though they all came to me and volunteered, usually they would cancel like twice before I came. And I also realized, like, you know, it wasn't great to like pull out your camera the first time you're meeting someone and start taking pictures. So I realized I had to like take the project slowly. There's also a video that I made as well. And these are, it's a pentagram on the ground and a whole bunch of inbred cats. I think there was supposed to be like 50 of them at the time, but I don't know. I didn't see any. I mean, I found some under the bed, but otherwise, like, you actually didn't see them in the apartment. Project repository. So with this project, it's kind of like my take on sort of neighborhood documentation. I walk my dog a lot. I mean, I find inspiration from a lot of sources, but I'm always inspired by wherever it is I'm living in that neighborhood, and I never know if I could ever integrate that into my project. And in this case, I really resisted, because on the block where I used to live in Brooklyn, there was this illegal tow truck company that would tow these crashed cars onto my street, and it was so disturbing, and I just tried to not look at them. And then finally, there was like the most interesting car right in front of my house, so I took out my camera to take a picture. And then sometimes, you know, when you look at something as a photograph, not as like in real life, you connect to it in a different way. And so I realized this idea of violated boundaries and this idea of a safe space being ruptured was so connected to all of my work and was really powerful. In this case, you see like the baby booties, so this idea of talisman, food, objects, all these different everyday objects that become heightened and changed because of its connection with these cars. A lot of people think of the cars as an extension of their home and as a safe space. I personally don't think it that way. I come up with like any excuse not to drive. But and because I think it challenges our ideas around, to see these images. And they're kind of evolving narratives. Like in this case, there were these beautiful flowers, and the next day, the windows of the car were broken and most of the stuff was removed. So, and I also didn't know how long the car would be there. So I would go out and take a picture, and then I would also think about, okay, if I can come back and light this or come back at a certain time of day, what is it that I want to photograph? A car might be there for weeks or it might be there for like a few hours. So, and it was funny because at the time I was working on a project in my art studio, which was just a block away from my house, and I was trying to photograph these objects that I had collected from people who, through professional organizers, but they worked with people who really had difficulty letting go of objects, and they would send me an object, and I would photograph it and send the photograph back to them. So the photograph was a way of letting go of these objects. But I never, for myself, could figure out how to photograph them, and in fact, right now, my storage unit has a whole bunch of objects that I never resolved what to do with. So I become the hoarder of the hoarder's objects. And anyway, so as I'm trying to figure out how to photograph those objects, I did find these other objects that were just much more natural for me in terms of how to photograph them within these spaces. And I was interested in a lot of the childhood objects that I saw, sort of nostalgic element to them, and looking in through the camera. What happened was I was photographing them, I was a bit nervous about the tow truck drivers because a lot of people in my neighborhood were trying to get the company to leave. And so at first, I knew that they were wondering what I was doing. And it wasn't like I became really good friends with them, but I think they understood it was for a different purpose. But in any case, they kept saying, this one guy kept saying to me, "You should really make a calendar of these." And I was like, I don't know, it's a kind of a good idea. Maybe I'll make a calendar of these. Because usually you look at a calendar and it's all about the beautiful car or this fantasy that you want. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to make a calendar of these, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. So one other thing is I took, during Sandy, that's how high the water went in that car. So it became really interesting how these cars contain these larger stories in the area. This is another one after Sandy. These are mostly medium format. Yeah, I don't think there's no 4x5. It was just too hard to shoot through the glass and everything with it. So here they are in the calendar form. And I didn't use any numbers or years, just thinking about how you can't account for, and you don't usually commemorate tragedies or traumatic events. And just the altered experience of time around that, I wanted to allude to through not including the dates. It's not a very functional calendar. Okay, so Bedside Manor. This is a project that explores illness, performance, empathy. I was photographing standardized patients. They're trained medical actors, and very common in all medical schools to use them. So they perform a specific patient with a set of symptoms to help improve diagnostic skills and bedside manner of med students. And when I heard about it, I thought it was the most fascinating profession. One, I feel very uncomfortable going to a doctor's office, partly because I had asthma growing up, so I was sick a lot, so I have this just general distrust of doctors. And also because you kind of have to play a role. There's this, you're the patient, they're the doctor, and it's this very authoritative set of relationships. And so one of the things that interests me about the standardized patient simulations is that after the simulation is done, the actor slips out of character and they give feedback to the medical student about their body language or anything else. So I like the idea of giving agency to the patient. And I decided to photograph them through these two-way mirrors. So oftentimes it's the medical professor who's on the one side observing. All these are recorded. If you look closely, there's a video, that's a mic, and there's video cameras. So for me, it was a way of referencing this spectacle of suffering and this history of photography and its connection to medical photographs. A lot of those pictures that were taken historically of subjects for medical purposes they considered the subject of the photograph as a statistic. They were very controlling and objectifying images. So I wanted to create, a feeling of like what it's like to be a patient, where there's a bit, all of a sudden you're being observed by someone else and it's your body and it's so personal. At the same time, you're relying on someone else to make these decisions and to tell you what's going on. And this is a reference picture. This painting hung in Freud's office is the French neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot, and there's a female hysteric patient fainting into someone's arm, and Charcot's lecturing to this enraptured male audience. And he would display his hysteric patients in an amphitheater, negatively connecting women and pathology. And he described his most performative patients as his stars. So the history of medicine is very theatrical. And in these images, one of the things that I was also wanting to capture was this feeling of an authentic moment, even though I wanted to make it clear that there was something being set up and there was this artifice involved as well. And to me, that also ties in this interesting way to the photographic history of portraiture. I believe that every time you're taking a picture of someone else, there is this performance of identity. So performance is already part of the history of portraiture. So if you sort of suspend disbelief as a viewer, kind of similar to the med students within these simulations, if you believe in the picture in some way, is that the person's really in character? Are they revealing something about themselves that's more personal? So I like those type of questions that hover around the images. And it was a very strange way to take a picture because basically they can't see me at all. I'm shooting through almost like a wall, right? They're looking at a mirror of themselves. But in order to take a picture, it cuts off your light so much that I had to like blast these strobe lights. So technically it was very hard to do. This is a husband and wife, very moving. They have a child on life support in this scenario. They played it together many, many times. And this project did help me overcome my fear of doctor's offices a little bit, believe it or not, kind of looking behind the curtain. And it also made me nervous about some of the future doctors. But no, I think in general, they're getting better. In general, I think they are teaching them bedside manner. I think it is an improvement. So these are some of these surreal training facilities that I was really drawn to. I'm going to show you a short clip of a film. So there's a film component, and I think the pictures for me ask questions about empathy, how we look at images of suffering, not just in like these pictures, but just in a larger idea of how we react to images of pain and suffering photographically. So it's much more about the patient, and the film, it's a much more complex narrative and story that I could ever tell in the still photograph. So for me, it really is like the heart of the piece, and the project actually originated, I had a film idea, and the pictures came second in this case. And this is Dr. Alice Flaherty, and she's a neurologist who practices at Mass General and teaches at Harvard, and she's studying the neuroanatomy of empathy. I had read a book of hers and thought she was great, and then I heard about her new research, and I asked to meet her, and somehow she ended up starring in this film and becoming a good friend of mine, and we've been sort of bringing the film around to a lot of different medical schools. Went to University of Toronto, we're going to Duke University in a few weeks, Harvard Medical School. I've shown this in simulation conferences, but also a whole bunch of film festivals and galleries. So it's been this really awesome experience of having these conversations around this work. So it's one of my favorites. I don't want to go too fast, but this is some pictures from my show at Ben Ruby Gallery. I'm going to play you a short clip from the film. So one of the things about the film is that Alice plays these different roles. So you as a viewer are kind of piecing things together. You don't know if she's a real patient or a fake patient and what's real and what's not real. So kind of mimicking the med student in a way and having in their process of diagnosis.
I had a pregnancy where both of my twins died at birth, and about 10 days after that, it was like a switch went off or on in my brain. He was there all the time, even after they died, and there wasn't that much more for him to do. But he became expressionless. He just sort of shut down, and it really disturbed me. Now I was disturbed. I mean, I was kind of, very emotional at that point, but I just couldn't get over this blank face that he had. It was horrifying to me, and I knew that he actually I knew he was upset, because another obstetrician that I thought of as the nice obstetrician would tell me, oh my God, I've never seen him so upset about something, he's really taking this hard. But I never saw it, and it started to bug me. I just so much wanted to just have him say, oh, a terrible thing happened, or, even this must be hard for you, or something. And I got into this frame. I wanted to make him cry for me, I guess, because I was so sad. I wanted everybody in the world to be sad, sort of the rapacity of grief. And that was something that taught me that facial expression is important, and I was not brought up that way. I had like this WASP upbringing. I didn't see a lot of facial expressions before I went to college, and I thought I'd better get some. I'd better get some facial expressions, and that had never been that easy for me. A lot of my expressions, even now, I have to kind of plan them. Like raise the eyebrows, turn your head that way. And I had this shame about acting, but basically you're always acting, of course. This is what people realize in high school, that even when you're not acting consciously, you're always acting.
Ow. Ow. Ah. Ow, my knee. Oh. Ow. Ow. Ah. 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 Ah.
Start bleeding more.
Well, that's important because everybody needs to know what to do.
We'll be starting on time in just a few minutes. Thank you.
I play a French woman who's depressed. I play a woman whose husband has just died. I play a mom in a phone case who has a 3-year-old.
I have done any number of roles, a lot of psych roles. I've done domestic violence case. I've done a Marburg Ebola
38
case.
different doctors and got like 38 different physicals from...
I was a middle 20s man who was about to enter medical school. He was not sleeping well. He was over abusing alcohol a bit.
Oh, you got on a bow tie. My dad used to wear a bow tie. My dad used to wear a bow tie.
Feedback is now over. Please leave the room. Feedback is now over. Please leave the room.
All right, so I want to end with some pictures from my current project, Milk Factory. This project came about 5.5 years ago when I was pumping in I had given birth to my daughter, was back teaching, and I was pumping in this very weird lactation room at the CUNY school where I teach. You can see it's like very big with these empty shelves, and I wanted to take a picture of it, so I brought in my medium film camera and took a roll of film, and I thought of it more as just a record for myself. I took a lot of pictures of things the first year, which I didn't necessarily think of as art, but I looked at the pictures sometime later and realized that, my work, I'm thinking about what's public and private space, categories that you put space into, gendered space, psychological space, social space, and this fits into that, but it also, all of a sudden, mothering and caretaking become part of that conversation as well, and it appeared to me as a really interesting way to represent motherhood. And so I started accompanying women at their workday after they pump milk, or sometimes they pump the milk and I take the picture. So, I didn't even know what a lactation room was until like a few months before I gave birth. So if you're in that category, just to let you know, you have to pump every few hours after you have a child, and the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that you pump exclusively for 6 months, and you continue pumping beyond a year, but also incorporate solid food. So it's not culturally supported and sort of a blind spot. People don't really even know about it, myself included, but that also creates a lot of hindrances for women, and there's a lot of bias in the workplace just to take a break. So, and you can't really talk about lactation rooms without talking about the fact that we don't have any federally mandated paid leave in this country. So this is like the cheapest solution to that, to put in a lactation room and to send moms back to work right after they have a child. And in this case, yeah, I mean, I love how, this is a friend of mine who's photographing for a very blue chip art gallery in Queens, this artwork, but she's pumping in the bathroom, but I love how she like makes it her own and puts down the mat and like hangs up her bra. Like she's got a baby block, just like the random stuff you have in your bag. So people talk about lactation, pumping as a way for women to have autonomy, but of course there's like the darkness and the oddness of like, so that's kind of like, of being away from your child, not having that intimacy, and being in some weird space when you pump. So this one is a woman who's, again, in New York City. Most of these are in New York City. Very high-end person who's a building manager, and she has no place to pump because she's going to different buildings all day. So she pumps. This is the best she can do, like a boiler room, because there's a lock on the door and she can shut it, and there's an outlet for the pump. And that's like a rat trap. So of course I loved how there were these like 2 pumps, and then you have this sign, you've got this like, careful of your child, don't let your kid fall into this bucket. And I don't move anything, these are just, like I said, I'm as influenced by stage photography and setup photography as I am by documentary photography, but at the same time, like, I'm just moving my camera, finding the certain lighting, but I don't move things. So in this case, this room is very sterile. It almost looks like one of the doctor offices that I photographed in. And I think it does reveal a lot that there's usually no care whatsoever given to these spaces for women to use. And in fact, for a lot of people, you can't produce milk unless you're in a relaxed state. And what you look at actually is part of the experience. So people are advised to look at pictures of their children. And that's the sort of contradiction and strangeness of modern parenting today. And people bring up male sperm banks all the time when they see this picture. So you can't really see that's curator of the Whitney Museum. So they're all named after the pumping women. And I would say it's the most enjoyable project at a certain level I've ever done. It's usually a very transitional period when you go back to work after you have a young child and you're grappling with your birth experience and work and this new role that you're in, and it's usually an intense time period, and all of this comes up in the few minutes that I meet people. And a lot of strangers have asked to be part of this project. I like this one. This is a cosmetic nurse injector. That's Union Square out the window. So I like how there's a certain different sense of power in this one, where she's not subjected to photograph in this room, but this is like on her own terms, and you can tell she's the boss. And so I purposely photographed across the table where you might be having like a business meeting with her. So the camera placement becomes really important, and I love the sort of yin-yang with like the milk bottle reflection. This is a acquaintance of mine that's a VP at Italy. And again, it's like, I think it's funny, like milk and cookies at the same time, that's how it feels. Like you have to do this like, and there's also like a milk spill on her laptop, but you have to do this like kind of, like no one really likes pumping. And so you just like want to make it like a little nicer for yourself. You're like, okay, I'll bring in a cookie for myself, It's like how it feels. And she said that people are like being part of the project and are happy to sort of make this invisible labor that's not supported and recognized, to make it more visible. This is a public elementary school in Coney Island. the sort of picture I might take otherwise of a space where you've got the tape hanging down off the desk, and I love the 2 dying plants and then the 2 milk bottles that are also in plastic, and there's a map of like the water flow of New York City, so this idea of like fluids, the flow of fluids. Creative director at Domino magazine. And it was so funny because she kept trying, that little tiny part of the pump wouldn't stay in, so she kept like running into the picture and trying to stick it. But and I only had like 3 sheets of 4x5 film. I mean, it's almost like $10 to take a picture these days, you know? So that was it. We couldn't get it to stay in for the picture, and it's sort of the neurosis of motherhood. She was like, yeah, it kind of sums it up. You need that little bit of imperfection in it. So I had the opportunity to show this work last spring, even though the work is still in progress, and there will be a film component ultimately as well. And that was an opportunity through National Young Arts Foundation, which I'm a panelist for, and also I'm an alumni of, and that was at the Baxter Street CCNY. So what I ended up doing was showing this work in the project space, and also curating a show about women who make artwork that is inspired or tied to maternal experiences. So part of this is thinking about how for so long in history we see like idealized or sentimentalized ideas of motherhood. And as an artist, people are, you know, oftentimes historically afraid to make work about motherhood because of fear that it will not be taken seriously. And so I think things are starting to shift, and I wanted to curate that show as part of that, and this work I think is well. And other thing I realized is that men are like very interested in talking about lactation rooms from the exhibition, and there's also just this blind spot. So I didn't realize how educational the pictures would be. I didn't realize how big of a part of it that would become. That was like my bad, where I was doing something and I knocked over the milk and spilt it. I felt like really bad, but then it was also like the moment, you know, to have a little bit of the milk spill. So one of those happy accidents around picture taking. So yeah, thank you so much for listening.
We have time for a brief Q&A. The mic is just for the video. It doesn't make your voice louder. Please use it though.
Hi. Thank you for talking. I have so many questions, but I'll catch you after class or after this if you have a second. A few of them though. One basic one was with the video, the film you showed, and when you were like zooming in on her hands and on her face, were you taking 2 separate videos, or were you just cropping it in your editing process?
Yes, for that I planned it. There's 3 video cameras. I was almost thinking of it as her like interviewing herself, but also Alice wrote this beautiful thing about the patient-doctor relationship and the symbolism of the 2-way mirror. So yeah, that was three cameras set up from the start.
Okay, great, thank you. And then also, for your process of showing your work, how do you go about that? If you can just sum it up briefly, is it partially you reaching out to venues and them reaching out to you, or I don't know if you can speak on that at all.
It varies. I mean, right now I have a gallery in Chelsea. For the first show with the Nutshell Studies, I was like very naive and green, and I was like, okay, now I have a book coming out and I have to get a show. And so I have, you know, friends who know people, and so one of my friends was like, you should meet with the director of Bellwether. And then she was like, you're crazy, you want a show in like 4 months or 3 months? And then she was like, all right, well, yeah, I'll give you that show. So like that like fell into place in a way that normally does not happen for me that first show, and it was great because the book and the show came at the same time. But you know, there's oftentimes it's like one exhibition I was in, for like the haunted house work, I was in an exhibition in Germany through a curator that I met, and then I think based off that, for every time someone in Europe was doing like a paranormal show for a while, they were including my work in it. But yeah, just regular ways that you meet people. I'd probably be having more shows if I really knew the answer to that.
I think really fascinating things happen when you approach a spectacle or a substitution of real life in a documentary manner, which is something that you do over and over again in your projects. And I also know that writing is part of your practice, and I was wondering where do you insert the writing in? Is it documentary? Is it more leaning towards fiction? Or how do you take the writing and make it a part of this body of work?
So for the Haunted House project, I transcribed the oral histories, and some of the ghost stories are not very interesting. It's kind of like listening to someone tell you their dream. There's not like a beginning or a middle or an end, and they think it's like so real and amazing, but if you weren't there, you might not get it. So there are some interesting ghost stories, but they're not all. So for that, it was like editing, which gives us like a range of the types of stories that I collected. And so even though that has a documentary element of that is not very heavily edited, at the same time, you know, you could also think of that as adding a layer of fiction because it's creating a framework around the pictures and the way that they'll be interpreted. And the essay in that, it's more of a personal essay with the Nutshell Studies. I wrote this lengthy biography about the woman who made them, and no one had written about her at that point. And so that was very challenging. I had so many interviews, I had done so much research, and I had, you know, sort of condensed that into an essay, but I felt like I couldn't give that material to someone else, and I also very specifically wanted to frame her work in a feminist manner and to consider it according to gender in a very specific way. And so it was painful, but it was also felt completely essential. And now, in a way, the film sometime is taking the place for the book in terms of creating a more complex narrative and story to go along with the photographs. Any other questions?
So this is a small question about the recordings that you did for Haunted Houses. Were they, what are they? Are they you telling the stories? Are they the people telling the stories?
Okay, sorry, I didn't clarify that. So I just have an audio recorder, and I just say, "Can you tell me the ghost story in your house?" And usually, you know, people just go on and tell their story.
Right. And then in the exhibition, it's them when they're played. It's them telling the stories.
It's just them, yeah.
Right.
So on the record, it's again like the book, a selection of the most interesting ones, and it's great because there are all these different accents and different ways, and there's a child, and yeah.
I have a related question. You speak very beautifully about your art, unusually beautifully. And there is this penchant for narration. You know, on one hand, in all of your projects are like typography, especially those that have something to do with architecture. You'll immediately think of the history of photography and the typography of architecture. But then your interest going in the direction of video really surprised me. So there is something else behind it. You're really interested in a story that you're telling. And I wonder, can you even consider yourself changing the medium from photography to video and film? Would you go that far?
If there was a certain project that I didn't feel needed a still component, I would never take still photographs unless it offered something else. So with the Bedside Manor, it started out as a film project, and then I became really interested in thinking about portraiture and creating those pictures. But I would only do a video or a film if the project called for it. At the same time, I like the process of making photographs so much more. It's kind of like writing. Like the film and writing are very painful for me, and taking photographs is something that I love the process of just being totally by myself, working solo, the slowness of it, the simplicity of it. So I know I'll always be taking pictures. And then, yeah, I think it's true. Like, I am interested in both the way a story is told and narrated, but as well as the content of that work. It really is both of those for me. It's not like someone said once, like, oh, it's like an excuse to get inside people's houses. And I was like, well, no, I really am interested in all of it. You know, it's not just like a license or an excuse. I'm interested in the whole story and everything that goes around it. But at the same time, I think with, yeah.
And I'm sorry, and when you showed this works, did you show video by itself, or do you always show it together with photographs as part of a show?
With the Ben Ruby Gallery, I had the film in one room and the photographs in the other 2 rooms, but I would show the photograph separately or the video separately. I don't feel like they absolutely have to be together.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.